So Mark Carney just flew to Beijing, shook hands with Xi Jinping, and came back with what he's calling a landmark trade arrangement. Sounds impressive, right? Except Doug Ford just took one look at this deal and basically said, "Are you kidding me right now?" And honestly, after digging into this mess, I'm starting to think Ford might have a point. Welcome back to Canadian Insights, where we're breaking down the trade deal that's got Ontario's Premier losing his mind and threatening to turn Canada's auto sector into a cautionary tale. Let's set the scene here. It's early Friday morning, most of us are still half asleep scrolling through our phones, and Mark Carney drops the news that he's just inked a deal with China. The pitch sounds simple enough on paper. China agrees to reduce tariffs on Canadian canola. We get cheaper access for our farmers to one of the world's biggest markets. In exchange, Canada opens the door to Chinese electric vehicles with preferential tariff rates. A win-win for everyone, right? Agricultural exports go up, Canadian consumers get access to more affordable EVs, and we all hold hands and sing Kumbaya while saving the planet. Except there's one tiny problem. Doug Ford is standing in Queen's Park absolutely furious, and he's not alone. The Premier of Ontario fired off a statement that basically reads like a strongly worded letter from your disappointed parent, except instead of grounding you, his warning about economic catastrophe. Ford's argument boils down to this: we're about to get flooded with cheap Chinese electric vehicles, and in return, we get vague promises about maybe possibly investing in Canada's economy. Oh, and by the way, this could torch our relationship with the United States, our largest trading partner, the country that buys the majority of our auto exports. No big deal, just potentially destroying thousands of jobs and gutting Ontario's manufacturing heartland. But hey, at least we can sell more canola, right? Here's where this gets messy, and trust me, it gets really messy. The auto sector isn't just some random industry we can afford to gamble with. We're talking about the backbone of Ontario's economy. Hundreds of thousands of jobs depend on automotive manufacturing and the supply chain that feeds it. These aren't just assembly line positions either. We're talking engineers, designers, parts manufacturers, logistics workers, the entire ecosystem that keeps communities alive from Windsor to Oshawa. And Doug Ford is watching Mark Carney potentially throw all of that into a wood chipper for the sake of a deal that might help canola farmers. Now don't get me wrong, I've got nothing against canola farmers. They deserve fair access to markets. But when you're trading one sector's gains for another sector's potential collapse, you better be absolutely certain the math works out. The problem is, the math doesn't work out. At least not according to Ford's team and a growing chorus of auto industry insiders who are watching this unfold with increasing alarm. Chinese electric vehicles are cheap. Like really cheap. They are flooding markets around the world because China has spent decades building massive manufacturing capacity, subsidizing production, and creating efficiencies that Western automakers simply can't match without similar government support. When you lower the tariff barriers and let those vehicles into Canada at preferential rates, you're not creating a level playing field. You're tilting it so hard that Canadian and American automakers are suddenly sliding downhill with no brakes. And here's the kicker that's got Ford absolutely livid. The United States is watching this deal very carefully. America has been crystal clear about one thing: they do not want Chinese EVs gaining a foothold in North American markets. They've implemented their own tariffs and trade barriers specifically to prevent exactly what Carney just agreed to allow. So when Canada opens the door to Chinese electric vehicles, even with quotas and restrictions, we're creating a potential backdoor into the American market. And you know what the Americans are really good at? Closing backdoors. Forcefully. Ford's warning about closing the door on Canadian automakers accessing the American market isn't hyperbole. It's a legitimate concern based on how integrated our automotive industries are. We build parts in Canada that go into cars assembled in the United States. We assemble vehicles in Ontario that get sold across America. The entire system depends on regulatory harmonization and seamless cross-border trade. When Canada starts making deals that potentially undermine American trade policy on Chinese goods, we risk triggering retaliatory measures that could devastate our own exports. It's like borrowing your neighbor's lawnmower, then using it to cut your other neighbor's grass after they specifically asked you not to help that guy. Don't be surprised when the first neighbor wants their lawnmower back and maybe stops lending you things altogether. The political optics here are absolutely brutal for Carney. He's trying to position himself as a pragmatic leader who can navigate complex international relationships and deliver wins for Canadian industries. And to be fair, getting China to reduce tariffs on canola is genuinely difficult. Those negotiations don't happen overnight, and agricultural producers have been pushing for better access to Chinese markets for years. But the execution on this deal feels rushed, incomplete, and tone-deaf to the realities of Ontario's economic priorities. You can't just fly to Beijing, shake hands, declare victory, and expect everyone back home to applaud when you've potentially set fire to an entire manufacturing sector. Doug Ford smells blood in the water, and his circling. His statement wasn't just policy criticism. It was a political attack designed to paint Carney as out of touch with working-class Canadians, willing to sacrifice good manufacturing jobs for photo ops with foreign leaders. Whether that's fair or not, it's effective messaging. Ford has built his entire political brand on being the guy who fights for Ontario workers, who stands up to elites making backroom deals that hurt regular people. This situation hands him that narrative on a silver platter. Carney the globalist making deals in Beijing while Ontario auto workers worry about their futures. It practically writes itself. So what does Ford actually want? Well, he laid it out pretty clearly in his statement, and honestly, some of it makes sense even if you're not a Ford superfan. First, scrap the electric vehicle mandate. Ford has been railing against this for months, arguing that forcing manufacturers to meet aggressive EV targets without adequate infrastructure or consumer demand is crushing the industry's competitiveness. He wants regulatory harmonization with our trading partners, especially the United States, so we're not creating arbitrary barriers that make it harder for Canadian plants to compete. And he wants the federal government to eliminate fees and costs that add thousands of dollars to vehicle production without delivering tangible benefits. Are these reasonable requests? Depends who you ask. Environmental advocates would argue that backing off EV mandates is surrendering to climate change and abandoning our commitments to reduce emissions. Industry groups would counter that mandates without corresponding support and market readiness just force companies to build products consumers don't want to buy, leading to losses, layoffs, and plant closures. The regulatory harmonization piece is harder to argue against. If American plants operate under one set of rules and Canadian plants operate under stricter rules, guess which plants become more attractive for investment? As for the fees and additional costs, that's a legitimate competitiveness question. Every dollar added to production costs matters when you're competing globally on razor-thin margins. The fundamental tension here is between competing priorities that don't have easy answers. We want to combat climate change and transition to cleaner technologies. We also want to protect good-paying manufacturing jobs and maintain economic stability. We want access to international markets for our agricultural products. We also want to protect our industrial base from unfair competition. Mark Carney tried to thread the needle with this China deal, and instead, he might have just poked everyone in the eye simultaneously. The canola farmers got a win, assuming China actually follows through on reducing those tariffs and doesn't find creative ways to maintain barriers through other mechanisms. But the auto sector feels betrayed, thrown under the bus for agricultural gains that might not even materialize. And Ontario, the economic engine of Canada, is watching its premier go to war with the Prime Minister over a trade deal that could reshape the province's economic future. This is the kind of conflict that defines political legacies and election outcomes. Here's what makes this whole situation so frustrating. Canada is perfectly capable of negotiating good trade deals that balance multiple interests and protect our economic priorities. We've done it before. But it requires careful coordination between federal and provincial governments, meaningful consultation with affected industries, and a willingness to walk away from deals that don't serve our broader interests. Flying to Beijing and announcing a landmark arrangement that blindsides your own premier and threatens a critical manufacturing sector is not how you build consensus or deliver sustainable policy. Doug Ford might be grandstanding. He might be positioning himself for future political battles or trying to shift blame for Ontario's economic challenges. But his core criticism, that this deal prioritizes short-term diplomatic wins over long-term economic strategy, deserves serious consideration. If we're going to open Canadian markets to Chinese electric vehicles, even in limited numbers, we better have ironclad guarantees about corresponding investments in Canadian manufacturing, protection for our workers, and alignment with American trade policy. Otherwise, we're not making a deal. We're making a mistake. So that's the mess we're dealing with right now. Mark Carney thinks he scored a win in Beijing. Doug Ford thinks he just handed Ontario's auto sector a death sentence. And the rest of us are left wondering whether anyone in charge is actually thinking through the consequences of these decisions before they make them. If you found this breakdown helpful, do me a favor and smash that like button so more people can stay informed about what's actually happening in Canadian politics. Subscribe to Canadian Insights because we're dropping multiple videos daily breaking down the stories that matter to you. Drop a comment and let me know what you think. Is Ford overreacting, or is Carney playing with fire? I want to hear your take. Thanks for watching. and I'll see you in the next one.